Help me get rid of my hiccups. When I, now 30F, was about 18, my family and I were all hanging around the living room after dinner. My dad suddenly got a pretty bad case of the hiccups, and like any dad would, turn to me and my little sister and said, "Quick, someone scare me." My little sister, of course, jumped up and yelled boo in a silly voice, but of course, that did nothing since he was expecting it. That's when I looked my father dead in the eyes and flatly said, "I'm pregnant." His face suddenly turned serious as he held my gaze. "That's not funny," he said. I shrugged. "No, but I bet your hiccups are gone." They were. This part is that I was a very by-the-book, straight-laced kid in high school. He didn't party, drink, do drugs, or even date due to a lot of religious reasons I held to very tightly at the time. I was an extremely awkward tomboy who read excessively, watched anime, collected swords, played Halo poorly, and was considered one of the guys in my circle of friends. So the fact that this would even remotely scare my dad was insanely ironic. And OMG, I didn't expect all the likes and words. Thank you, kind strangers. Glad you enjoyed the story. It's a favorite of mine to tell.
I have to return a cable box damaged in a fire. Okay, but it's gonna stink up the place. In the summer of 2007, I was working in NYC and living in an apartment across the river in Weehawken. One morning, I got a call while I was at work. My apartment was on fire. The fire started on the floor above mine, and my floor and most of my belongings were heavily damaged. A few days later, I called the cable company to cancel service, and they demanded that we return their equipment. I was like, my apartment had a fire. That equipment is toast. They insisted that they would keep billing me until I provided proof that the equipment had perished. So I showed up at the local office with the remnants of the equipment, which still reeked of smoke, and dumped them out on the counter. They agreed to cancel my service.
Are you sure you want me to take part in this go-kart race? Sure thing, boss. A few years back, I started my first job as a mechanic and was informed of a mandatory monthly kart race in the local track, which was promoted by my boss and owner of the company. He didn't care if you enjoyed it or not. He booked the time slot and we all had to show up, after working hours and paying our own ticket to drive. It was supposed to be a team-building exercise, and I could see the boss really liked race cars through the various pictures and trophies in his office. During the week, in anticipation to the event, boss would participate in setting the mood for the upcoming race. It was the only topic that week, and I was told by colleagues that this was really important. I knew that on the evening of the race, I had to pick up my girlfriend, and that would clash with the race. So a couple of days before, I told my supervisor that I would not attend the race. It was after hours, and on my dime anyway, so I didn't think it would be a problem. Some 20 minutes later, I'm summoned to the boss office, and he's not looking happy. He tells me that building the team spirit is one of his priorities, and that I'm new there, so I was to give a lot of focus to this monthly event if I was to keep working there, because it was part of the core culture of the company. I really needed the job, so I just said, "Sure thing, boss." On the evening of the event, I drive to the kart track, and, upon arrival, I see my colleagues all in jeans and t-shirts and my boss in full ballerina attire. He had racing overalls, racing boots, gloves, and even a custom helmet. It dawned on me the reason for the event and why so much attention was given to it. Kart racing was his thing. With about 15 racers, I asked to start dead last. Boss man listens to me talking and intervenes in front of everyone that we were there to race and not to just drive around slowly. Up until that point, I wasn't really paying much attention, but I decided to comply and show how much the core corporate culture was important to me. Starting from last, I proceeded to overtake all other karts, including boss man on the outside of a fast corner. Overtaking on the outside is often seen as a bold, arrogant move. After just a few more laps, I reached him again. As I was about to lap him, he went into the pits and stepped out. I duly won the race, and as I left the track into the bar, the real team-building event, someone tells me that the boss had left. At the bar, the topic of the evening was how I had traced everyone, and how the boss, who had won all races since ever, was livid with my performance. Too bad for him. I guess I forgot to add to my resume that I had raced karts competitively as a kid, so I knew what I was doing and shattered his Ricky Bobby dreams. After that, I was always Curtis Wells invited but never again required to show up to his events. I went a few times but arrived late on purpose so I would just take part on the bar thing and not the race.
The Time read your contract backfired regarding holiday pay. Back in 2015, I worked for a pretty dismal call center. It was an outsourced center that handled customer support for a lot of UK retailers. Staff turnover was real high, with the vast majority being on temporary contracts, and the promise of a permanent contract being hung over people's heads to make them suck up being treated like crap. After working there for about 2 years, in late February of that year, I was offered a permanent contract, because they wanted to put me on their team leader program. The pay was slightly better, the job security was better. The only major difference was how holidays were handled. People on temporary contracts were paid for any unused holidays at the end of the working year in April. People on permanent contracts had to use their holidays or they would lose them. I had just over 3 weeks' holidays saved up, so the day I accepted I booked 3 weeks in March so as I wouldn't lose them in April. March rolled round and my manager told me that my holidays had been refused. I said that's fine as long as they pay me for them, and he replied that no, if you don't use your holidays you lose them. I said that I was trying to use my holidays and they were not letting me. He shrugged, said it's the duty of the employee to manage their holiday time wisely and I should read my contract, despite the fact I had only gotten that contract 3 weeks earlier and the holidays worked differently. Understandably annoyed that evening, I went home and read my contract from beginning to end, and discovered my manager had overlooked one crucial part of the paperwork. The contract clearly stated I had to give a week's notice, and that any holidays not used would be paid to any leaving employee in full on their last paycheck. The next day I came into work and announced I would be quitting unless paid my holidays or allowed to take the time off, and if they accepted my notice then to be sure my holiday days was included in my final paycheck. My boss asked me if I was really going to quit over this, and I replied, was he really going to lose one of his most reliable employees over this? He wouldn't budge. I assume he thought I was bluffing. So I handed in my notice, and on my leaving interview with my manager's manager made sure to explain exactly why I was leaving. And yes, my final paycheck did include my unused holiday days. The end.
Won't cancel my internet unless you're unable to provide service, okay? So when I was living in the city, I had a contract with my internet provider, Rogers, for my fellow Canadians. After a year in my apartment, I decided to move in with my then boyfriend, now husband, on a farm on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. So I called to cancel my internet. Me? Need to cancel, I'm moving. Them interrupting me, your service moves with you. You sign a contract for X years and it only ends early if we are unable to provide service. You are unable to provide service, I'm moving to a rural area. Not possible. We provide service to many rural communities. What's your new postal code? I provide it. That's for town name. We have service in town name. Me? But I'm not living in town name. That's just my postal address. I'm living on a farm outside of town name. Then repeats contract speech with the additional offer of an absurd buyout fee if I want to cancel my contract early without cause. Cue malicious compliance. Me, fine, you know what? I would love high-speed internet instead of shitty satellite internet. When can you come? The install guy had to call me 3 times from the van. Twice because he was lost and a 3rd time because he was stuck in a snowdrift. When he finally arrived, it took him about 30 seconds to determine that there is obviously no infrastructure for high-speed internet. Offered him hot coffee for his trouble coming out, and he happily canceled my service free of charge and accepted my equipment return. Cost Rogers a $3 for our call-out when you count the drive just to try to keep one impossible contract. Edit to add, well, this went a little crazy overnight. Thanks for all the upvotes and awards, everyone.
Check out my other tremendous videos.